Welcome to my channel. Chris, what are you doing at home, Angela? My wife of 28 years asked. She had just walked through the door and saw me sitting at our kitchen table, less than 10 feet away from her. Her body was partially shielded by a tall, young man who had followed her into our home. As always, Angela looked stunning. Her chestnut hair fell gracefully onto her shoulders, and she was dressed professionally, as she always was for work. Today, she wore a white blouse, and I couldn't help but notice that one extra button was undone, revealing a hint of cleavage. Her black linen skirt accentuated her long, world-class legs. I quickly processed Angela's ridiculous question and responded just as foolishly. I live here. A flash of irritation, which had been growing more frequent over the past few weeks, surfaced as she snapped, "Of course, you live here. What I want to know is why you're home at 3:30 in the afternoon." I often joke that I've loved Angela since the moment we first met. I had an appointment with her company's management, and Angela was their administrative assistant. She greeted me in the lobby and escorted me to the conference room. For hours later, as she walked me back to the lobby, I took a chance and asked her out to dinner. The rest, as they say, is history. By now, Angela's gentleman friend had stepped around her and was standing beside her. I almost expected him to smirk, but instead, there was a flicker of unease in his sharp eyes. Nothing was going as planned. "I think I could ask you the same question, Angie. What are you doing home an hour and a half early?" I said, staring directly at her. Angela and I were bound by fate from the moment of our first date. I can proudly say that I dedicated every ounce of my energy to her and our family. I worked hard and built a small but successful insurance brokerage with the support of her employer. Angela enrolled in college, earned her bachelor's degree after 6 years, and transitioned to a role in human resources, eventually becoming the head of HR at the company's office in Hartford, Connecticut. For nearly 3 decades, I had loved Angela unconditionally. As I sat there, looking at the monster she had become over the past few weeks, I forced myself to stay calm. I wanted to break her just as effectively as she had broken me when I discovered she was a lying, cheating adulteress. When I flashed Angie my trademark crooked smirk, she responded, "We came home early to talk to you." I asked, staring directly into Angie's eyes. The idiot took the opportunity to introduce himself. He stepped forward, extended his hand, and confidently said, "Mr. Harrington, Chris, I'm Michael Browner. I'm the new attorney at Kellerman & Sons, and I've been working closely with Angie for the past couple of months." Still glaring at Angie, I ignored his outstretched hand. Every primal instinct in me screamed to leap up, wrap my hands around his worthless neck, and squeeze until his eyes popped out of his skull. Instead, I growled, "I know exactly who and what you are." For the first time, I saw signs of unease in my wife. Then, she flinched as I continued, "Angie, you once threatened to cut something off the last person who called you Angie. So why are you tolerating such disrespect in your own home from this pile of trash?" I gestured toward the jerk. Angie looked both alarmed and embarrassed. By nature, she's meticulous in her planning. I was certain that she and the idiot had considered every possible scenario for this conversation. In her mind, everything had been neatly arranged. I was already a compliant cuckold. A quick glance at the jerk made me smile. I was absolutely certain his sphincter muscles had tightened and would soon be as tight as a rope. A storm was brewing, and it would be nothing like anything Angie and her boy toy could have imagined. I took a few deep, cleansing breaths, trying to push down the anger and disgust simmering in the quiet corner of my heart. Let's get this over with, I thought. Time to throw them off balance again. Why don't I make us 3 drinks? I suggested. We can talk in the living room. "A glass of wine, please," Angie requested softly. When I turned to the bastard, he looked wary. He responded to my offer by saying, "Angela told me you're a fan of bourbon and craft beer." I nodded. "Yes," I said, then stood up from the kitchen table and headed to the bar in our living room. As I left the room, I immediately heard urgent whispers as they moved in the opposite direction through the kitchen and into the living room. A few minutes later, I joined them in the living room. They were sitting together on the couch. I handed Angie a glass of her favorite Merlot and gave the idiot a dirty glass filled with amber beer. I picked up my bourbon, poured myself a 2-inch pour, and sat in the armchair across from them. Raising my glass in a toast, I took a small sip of the fiery liquid, returning the toast. The jerk took a sip of his beer, held the glass in front of him, and seemed to study the color of the drink. "This beer has the most unusual taste of any I've ever tried." "What is it?" he asked. "Pabst Blue Ribbon," I replied. The jerk's eyes flared with anger, while Angie looked embarrassed and asked, "Isn't that the beer you said is worse than donkey piss and the crappiest beer ever made?" She was halfway through her question when she noticed I was laughing. She exploded, "You're such a jerk. We came home to have a calm conversation with you, and you've been nothing but rude and condescending." I smiled and asked, "I'm an arrogant, condescending jerk?" "Well, I think it's time we start addressing your conversation instead. I'm sure I'll soon learn how to have polite, inspiring, and loving discussions with my eternally faithful wife." Angie shrank back and couldn't meet my gaze. "Chris, we came here to talk everything through," she said. I cut her off. "You got it right the first time." "Excuse me?" she said, looking confused. "When you first addressed me, you called me Mr. Harrington before presumptuously calling me Chris. I much prefer the first option. Actually, I insist you call me Mr. Harrington." As his face began to turn red, I finished with a shrug, adding, "or the Honorable Sir." Instead of letting the fool continue, I turned to Angie and asked, "What is it you wanted to talk about?" When the idiot looked like he was about to respond, I said, "I'm talking to my wife." "Idiot. Just sit there, drink your amber donkey piss, and shut up." Angie was furious. "Your behavior is disgusting. I want this to stop right now." I nodded and appeared to consider her request, then asked, "Do you think my behavior is better or worse than yours has been over the last 5 or 6 weeks?" "What are you talking about?" Angie asked, half confused, half worried. The jerk seemed to hold his breath, waiting for my response. I guess he realized their carefully crafted plan was starting to fall apart. Looking Angie straight in the eyes, I said, "I don't know what pisses me off more, the fact that you let him shove his worthless little tool into your dried-up old hole, or that you've been treating me like an idiot." The stunned expression on Angela's face was priceless. Her eyes narrowed, and in a hushed voice, she asked the obvious, "How do you know?" "It seems I have more friends in your office than you do," I replied. 2 weeks ago, I received an anonymous letter from one of your colleagues. The letter revealed that you're having an affair and included 3 attachments showing you and the idiot at a picnic in Millwoods Park. The photos were full of hand-holding and kissing. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Angie was trying to figure out how to continue when I interrupted her and asked, "So, do you want a divorce?" "No," she said, sliding to the edge of the couch and leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. "I love you, and I don't want a divorce. What Michael and I have is just a short-term fling. He's new to Connecticut and hasn't made many friends. Once he settles in, I'm sure he'll find a steady girlfriend. I'm really sorry, but this just isn't going to work for me. I signed up for a monogamous relationship with a loving wife. Instead, I've come to find that the woman I devoted my life to is an adulteress, a disgrace. Divorce fits much better into my plans for the future." Angela started pleading. "Chris, just stop. I don't want a divorce, and I don't think you really want one either. This was a one-time fling. Nothing more. I'm attracted to Michael, and I wanted a little excitement in my life. It's never happened before, and it'll be over soon. I promise it won't happen again." I took a sip of my bourbon and sat in silence for a few moments before responding. "First of all, your promises are meaningless. Everyone in this room knows you're a liar and an adulteress." Angela's face turned red, but I wasn't done. "And secondly, why should I believe this is your first affair? I'm more inclined to think it's your 51st. Please, Chris, stop and think," Angela begged, her voice shaky. We've worked so hard to build our family, and now that Kelly's married, we can slow down and plan a wonderful retirement in a few years. By then, my fling with Michael will be long over and completely forgotten. I promise you, this is nothing more than a momentary lapse. I stood up, walked to the study without asking if anyone else wanted a drink, and refilled my glass. I could feel the tension in the room as I knew my lack of manners hadn't gone unnoticed by the two idiots in the living room, who were now huddled together, whispering. When I returned, Michael, who had been awkwardly silent up to that point, spoke. "May I say something, Mr. Harrington?" "Go ahead," I replied, my voice dripping with disdain. Michael gathered his thoughts before speaking. "Angela is right. Our relationship is nothing more than a short-term fling. I regret involving a married woman in an affair. I've never done this before, but we connected. And while your threat of divorce is understandable in the heat of the moment, it's ultimately unwise in the long run. You've spent decades together. Don't throw that away." I looked at him, unimpressed. Angela was worried about the prenuptial agreement her father forced me to sign, thinking it would cost her many assets in the event of a divorce. But I can assure you, as a lawyer, that a nearly 30-year-old agreement can easily be overturned. Laws change, legal phrasing becomes outdated, and any competent attorney could laugh that document out of court. But more importantly, Michael continued, you need solid proof of infidelity, aside from some mild public flirting that perhaps a few of our colleagues may have witnessed. I'm confident you don't have the evidence necessary to enforce the agreement. When he finished his legal summary, I couldn't help but think how foolish my wife had become. I turned to Angela and asked, "I don't understand why you sought legal advice from a corporate lawyer who graduated at the bottom of his class from South Texas College of Law." South Texas consistently ranks among the 10 worst law schools in the country. Michael looked at me, clearly offended, but I didn't care. "How do you know?" he asked, his voice trembling. "One of my many mottos is, know your enemy," I replied, turning back to Angela. "What's your plan, Angie?" It took her a few minutes to gather her thoughts before she said, "Michael and I are going to spend the weekend together. Tonight, I'll stay at his apartment, and tomorrow we'll leave for New York. We'll stay in the city until Saturday night, and I'll be back home on Sunday." Even though I knew their exact plans, her audacity ripped my heart out. "So, not only have you shared your body with this piece of garbage, but now you're planning to share our quarterly weekend getaway with him?" I asked, fighting back tears. "We've gone to New York 4 times a year, every year since we got married. Those were our memories, award-winning Broadway shows, concerts, sporting events. And now, you've destroyed all of it." Angela could see the devastation in my eyes, but I barely heard her response as the voices in my head screamed, "End this, now. For God's sake, stop this." Looking at Michael, I asked coldly, "Does she know you're sleeping with my wife?" "Christopher, stop," Angela interjected. "Michael is a widower. His wife died of cancer years ago. He's never cheated on her." I looked at her, smirking. "Unlike you, then," turning to Michael, I asked, "is that true? Are you a widower?" He shifted uncomfortably, glancing between me and Angela, before answering, "Yes." I stood up, pulled a folder from my bag, and opened it. "Dr. Cynthia Browner, Emergency Department Surgeon at St. John's Ascension Hospital in Detroit," I read aloud. "Husband, Michael Browner. Daughters, Katie, 11, and Lacey. Dr. Browner applied for her current position as of June 2nd and will relocate to Hartford, Connecticut, to join her husband once her children finish school." Angela's face went pale. She tried to speak, but I couldn't help myself. I burst out laughing. A cheater and a liar lying to a cheater and a liar. What is this world coming to? Michael reached out to take Angela's hand, but before I could shout, "Get your damn hands off my wife," I realized I didn't care anymore. "Angie, baby, I'm sorry. I lied to you. I couldn't help myself. You're so sexy and beautiful. I wanted you. I needed you," Michael said, standing up while still holding her hand. Let's go back to my place and talk. Tomorrow, we'll go to New York for a great weekend. After we return, we'll still have 3 weeks before my family arrives. And then you can go back to being a full-time wife, and I'll be a full-time husband and father. Angela stood, took his hand, and turned to me. After this weekend, I promise I'll completely end things with Michael. I'll come home on Sunday and be the same loving wife I've always been. We locked eyes for a long time, and I wondered if she could hear how my heart was shattering further. I'd been sitting here, politely letting them explain their little affair and how it wouldn't affect our relationship, but now I'd had enough. I've heard enough, I said. Now, I'd like to ask you both to sit down and give me about 30 minutes to outline the changes I see happening. They exchanged uncertain glances before reluctantly sitting. I pressed a few buttons on the remote, and the TV screen lit up with a Zoom call. Peter Lou, can you hear me? I asked. We can hear you, Chris, Peter replied. Angie, you obviously know our family attorney, Peter. I'd like to introduce you to his partner, Lou Beard, my new divorce attorney. Gentlemen, I'd also like to introduce you to Michael Browner, the extraordinary corporate lawyer. Angela and Michael were stunned, and I continued, Gentlemen, the floor is yours. Then, with cold finality, I added, Mrs. Harrington, I represent your husband in the upcoming divorce proceedings. The papers were filed with the court this afternoon. I would greatly appreciate it if you could hire an attorney to ensure you personally receive these documents. I will give you until the end of the day on Monday to respond. If I don't hear from your attorney by then, we'll have to hire a process server to deliver them to you. We've filed for divorce, citing infidelity as the cause. We have a private investigator's report that documents your sexual relationship with Mr. Browner using extensive audiovisual and telecommunication evidence. As Lou finished speaking, I tossed another folder onto the coffee table in front of Angie. The loud thud made both of them jump. This is a copy of our divorce filing. Along with the private investigator's report, I said to the stunned couple. As the idiot reached for the folder, Angie turned her attention back to the screen. We will insist the prenuptial agreement be fully enforced. You're aware that every 2 years, all business and personal legal matters for your family are reviewed. As part of that process, the prenuptial agreement was updated to ensure it aligns with current legal standards. Since we have your signed and notarized consent for every update over the past 28 years, I'm confident the agreement is fully enforceable. As a result of a vote conducted by the Board of Directors of Harrington Brokerage, you've been relieved of all corporate duties and are no longer affiliated with Mr. Harrington's firm. You will have 7 days to return your company car, and your corporate credit cards have been canceled. Your mobile phone will be deactivated in 7 days. Additionally, your memberships at Cedar Mountain Country Club and LA Fitness have been revoked. We have also canceled and deactivated 3 joint credit cards shared with my client. Your joint savings, checking, and retirement accounts have been frozen. According to the prenuptial agreement, we anticipate an 80-20 split of assets, with Mr. Harrington receiving the majority. Mr. Harrington will retain the house, free and clear. We have requested the court to expedite your eviction. Since you have a property you occasionally share with Mr. Browner, we will argue that relocating will be easier for you. We are requesting that the court immediately grant Mr. Harrington full ownership and give you 30 days to remove your personal belongings from the house. There will be no spousal support, and child support is, of course, not applicable. There are several minor claims that my client has made. Your attorney will be able to explain them to you. Chris, did I miss anything? You hit all the key points, Lou replied. The screen went dark, and just as quickly, Angie leapt to her feet, shouting, "Wait." She turned to me, her voice trembling. "Get them back. I have questions." I laughed. "That's not how this works, Angie. You'll need to hire your own lawyer to get those answers." "You bastard." Angie snarled. "I'm going to destroy you." Smirking, I looked at her accomplice. "Hey, idiot, what does your almost genius legal mind tell you about how this woman is going to destroy me in a divorce?" His silence made Angie slump back on the couch, defeated. I couldn't help but grin as I picked up the TV remote, waved it in front of her, and pointed it at the screen. The second Zoom meeting began. "Jake, can you hear me?" "Hi, Chris," Jake responded. "I've got a conference call, so let's make this quick." "Grown or you're fired, effective immediately," I said. "Your personal belongings will be removed from your office and placed in the lobby. If they're not claimed within 24 hours, they'll be discarded. You will not receive a recommendation." I looked at Angie and saw her trembling in fear. "I can't express how disappointed I am in your behavior as a senior executive," I continued. "It's inexcusable. However, 29 years of service can't be ignored. Your position in Hartford has been eliminated. I'm offering you an equivalent position in Albany, New York. You have 1 week to decide whether to accept the transfer and 30 days to relocate. If you decline, you'll be terminated." The screen went black again, and Angie buried her face in her hands, sobbing. The idiot leaned back on the couch, looking like he wanted to explode, but I just smirked at him. He was younger, probably stronger, but as dumb as a bag of rocks. Before he could react, I waved the remote again and pointed it at the TV. The screen lit up and I said, "Dr. Browner, can you hear me?" The idiot and Angie sat in stunned silence, their faces turning pale. The screen revealed the face of a beautiful blonde woman. "I asked you to call me Cynthia," she said. "Sorry, Cynthia. The idiot is all yours," I replied. "Michael, I've filed for divorce. Expect to be served in the next few days. The kids and I will be staying in Michigan. I've managed to keep my job at the hospital." The idiot pleaded, "Cynthia, please. We can work this out. It was just a fling." Her face twisted in disgust. "I've done some digging since Chris contacted me. This is the third job you've lost because you couldn't keep your little guy in your pants. After receiving the private investigator's report, I had him dig deeper. Mrs. Harrington, do you know Alice Packer? Tori Jones? Candy Phillips?" When Angie didn't respond, Cynthia laughed. I didn't expect an answer. The question was rhetorical. "I know they're all your colleagues. Did you know Michael had affairs with each of them? You were just one of his many lovers. Tell me, where should I send your things, Michael? You're no longer welcome in my house." The screen went black again and the idiot screamed, "I'm going to kill you, you bastard." He stood, struggling, but I pulled my .45 Colt from under the armchair cushion and aimed it at him. He looked like he was about to vomit. That was exactly the reaction I wanted. "It's pretty ironic," I said. "You cheat, lie, and share your body with this jerk, and I'm the one who needs a mental health professional." I laughed, continuing, after I told Dr. Waters our story. She asked me a question that really helped. She said, "Do you understand the old saying, 'Love is blind'?" When she asked that, it felt like a light switched on. I loved you so much that I never would have known you were a cheating adulteress if it weren't for that anonymous letter. My love was so strong that it blinded me to your flaws. Hell, in my eyes, you didn't have any flaws. I paused, watching her sob uncontrollably. "I hope you realize you'll never find anyone who loved you as much as I did. I'm going to keep seeing Dr. Waters. I think it's incredibly important to have someone to confide in after something as devastating as this. I never thought someone I loved so deeply could humiliate and disrespect me like this. But the good news is, I'll survive the pain and humiliation just like I'll survive you." I added, "Dr. Waters doesn't love revenge, but she agreed the first 3 Zoom meetings were fair. She thought you deserved some reckoning. However, she tried to talk me out of the next Zoom meeting. She thought it might set me back in my recovery. I thought about it, and I admit she's probably right, but I don't care. This next meeting will hurt me, but it will devastate you." I raised the remote again, and as I waved it in Angie's direction, she panicked, leaning back on the couch. I pressed a button, and the screen lit up. Angie's eyes widened and she groaned, "Oh no. Oh no. Please, God." The screen showed Kelly, my daughter, saying, "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied. "Why?" Angie screamed. How can you treat me so horribly? I heard everything, Mom, Kelly said. I heard every word you and your idiot boyfriend said over the last hour. I heard what you've done and what you're planning to do. You disgust me. Angie gasped. Kelly, sweetheart, please. This is a complicated situation. You're too young to understand. Screw you, Mom, Kelly snapped. I'm 26 years old, happily married. Your situation isn't complicated. It's grotesque on one hand and pathetic on the other. You're selfish and completely self-absorbed. Angela started pleading. Sweetheart, I've been so lonely since you left. It's been like living in a fog. I've missed you so much. Kelly's face on the screen twisted in disbelief. So, are you saying it's my fault you became a liar, a cheater, and an adulteress? That you crushed Dad and are planning to keep cheating on him? No, that's not what I'm saying, and you know it, Angie stammered. It doesn't matter, Kelly replied coldly. I think we all need a break from you. Kelly, I'll come to Boston this weekend, and we can talk. I'm so sorry this happened. I need to be with my baby. That's not going to work, Mom, Kelly replied. First, you'll be in New York with your worthless, unemployed, recently divorced boyfriend. I'm not going to New York. Angela insisted. I'll come, please. Second, Scott and I have planned a small private celebration for family.